Hello, welcome to another episode of Soul Sessions.
Welcome back.
I am Deborah Maldonado, and I'm here with Dr. Rob. And we are going to talk today, we're going to continue our personality series.
Yeah.
What are we talking about today, Rob?
Well, last time we talked about personality test, a little bit of testing. So today we'd like to talk about trauma and how it plays into assessment, how we think about it. What does coaching have to do?
Or does it have to do with?
The kind of decisions we had to make in developing our coaching program.
So really we're going to talk about our approach to how someone can overcome trauma in their life, and then also when it's appropriate for coaching and when it's not, and how to navigate your way through it, whether you're a coach or whether you're someone who's experienced trauma, to check in with yourself and our recommendation for how to approach it in an empowering way.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what is trauma? How would you define trauma?
Yeah, so we can think of it as a spectrum because not all trauma is the same. Obviously, somebody that goes through a war or is tortured in a conflict setting, that trauma is not the same as someone who perhaps loses a parent and goes through a difficult period in their lives.
Or gets bullied at school, light bullying. And, we all have had that experience. And according to the National Council for Behavioral Health, if you want to check out their website, it's thenationalcouncil.org. They talk about how to manage trauma. And their research shows that 70% of adults have experienced some kind of traumatic event in their life. So it's very common to have it. But what you were telling me earlier is that it's common to experience it, but not common to get help. Like most people don't seek help.
Yeah, unfortunately, that is important to understand, right? That as a nation, as a world, we need to have that conversation of, what should people do when they experience trauma? But often the systems for helping people kind of heal from trauma and go through therapies are not there.
Well, and with the internet now, everyone's an expert, and so people can go and there's a lot of information about trauma, especially now. It just seems like every time I go through my Facebook feed, there's someone who has an answer to it. So we wanted to kind of tell our approach to it. And so when you're talking about severe trauma, say they were at a war, or they witnessed, a parent die in front of them, or something traumatic happen in front of them, or something happened to them, abuse, like severe abuse, that wouldn't be something that coaches would work with or treat, but it's something that we should all know about. Like, we should all know that these things happen to people.
Yeah, from our perspective, that would not be coaching would not be an appropriate approach to helping somebody with severe trauma. There are very good therapies and people that specialize. They train really hard for years and years on how to help people through trauma, and those are the people that should be sought out when someone is looking for therapy.
And so one of the things that we talk about with coaching is this idea that there's this line of functioning, normal functioning. And the difference between coaching and therapy is that in therapy, they're assuming that there's some kind of dysfunction, that a person has PTSD or even depression, and they're not really functioning at that level. And the therapist's job to treat the mental illness, to get them to functioning. That's the goal, is to get them to that functioning level. And then with coaching, is what we're doing is we're assuming that the person is functioning, they're coping, and they could have had past experiences, and they worked with a therapist, and they're now at this level. And what we want to do is, in coaching, is we want to empower them to reach their potential. So there's a very different philosophy and a different stage in a client's development and so it's really good for someone to understand that, yeah, you're a coach and you're wonderful and you have so many talents, but you may not have the skills or the knowledge to bring them from that other place. And because coaching is unregulated, unfortunately, the danger is someone can make that person even more traumatized because they don't know what they're doing. They're not, trained in understanding what's really happening.
Yeah, I definitely would say, as a student of the mind for many, many years, someone that is really able to work with somebody that has undergone serious trauma would require specialized training, and it requires some dedication. Even let's say I know many therapists who don't feel equipped to deal with trauma because it's not part of their training. They're trained in more regular kind of everyday supportive kind of therapies, whereas for serious trauma, it would require specialized training.
And we're talking about severe trauma. We're not talking about, an unruly household and, I guess it. And another thing too, I'd like to get your take on is some people, in my experience, I've worked with people for over 20 years. Some people have had really tough experiences in their life. I mean, they've been through wars, and then they are very resilient. Where other people have had a little bit of trauma, like a minor trauma, but it kind of stops them, and they can't really cope because of maybe something in comparison. And so what makes a person, what's that happens in a person, what variables are there that indicate whether they can, it's not really the level of trauma in some stage, in some people, it's more the level of ability to cope with it. Yeah. And so there's a lot of variables there.
Right. Like we've said from the beginning, that it's always a brain environment interaction that we're looking at when we deal with an individual. And one of the best approaches when there is a question of trauma is to get a good assessment. A good assessment will give you that sense of where the patient is or where the client is, what their cognitive functioning is, how well are they dealing with their intimate relationships, the relationships with their wives, with their husbands, with family members. How well are they able to function at work? Are they able to focus, do the work, have kind of get that sense of meaning out of their life? If they're not right, a good assessment will tell you where they're at. And it really gives you a sense of what kind of therapy would be appropriate for that person.
So all of us, I know for me, I was always self-treating, all my life. Right. So I would just read books and I would look online. Well, now, like in the 90s, started looking online. But my friends that were healers and doing all this like kind of workshops and dealing with it in kind of like not go to therapy. I don't know. I mean, didn't have any severe trauma, so it was fine. But in a way, I kind of felt that there was still something wrong with me. Like I was still like just, this damaged person, there's something damaged about me. And so I think one of the ways that we look at trauma is not that we're, what level of like a lot of people think it's deep-rooted pain, damage to a person.
Soul wound or something.
Yeah, like a soul wound. And it's just, this heaviness to it.
Yeah, I mean...
so even if you've had severe, I'm trying to say that it's not a life sentence. Like you don't have to cope with it your whole life. There are ways to...
Yeah, it would definitely depend on the severity of the trauma, of course, and also the resiliency of the individual, like you were saying, because we all have different genetic makeups, different strategies for dealing with difficult situations. And so some people are able to manage it fairly well and perhaps don't need therapy. They can go into coaching, whereas others, they might need that supportive kind of therapy with special, let's say, with people that are specially trained to work with trauma. So
if you're not sure, one of the things that you have to look at is, I think the number one is like, how's your emotional life? Do you wake up stressed and anxiety every day, where you can't function? Or depressed where you can't function? Like you're hyper and worried all the time, or really stressed, or relationships. You have a hard time keeping relationships. Kind of, there's always a lot of drama. Like that could be an indicator that you really should get an assessment and get treatment for that.
Absolutely. It has to do with the sense of self, but it would be the sense of self at the ego level, meaning at our individual level, where we start to think of who am I, what is my identity in life, what is my role. Often trauma will disrupt that sense of self, and people have difficulty kind of getting back to that point. And so they feel like there's something seriously wrong with me here. I can't seem to find that sense of self that I used to have.
And there's also this idea of safety too, that if you've had a traumatic event, all of us have been in a place where our safety was taken away. But if it was chronic in childhood, that person would, first of all, you might have a hard time trusting others, and the kind of even being able to deal with your own emotions. So a lot of people are afraid that have had severe trauma are afraid of even feeling, because they feel like they're going to go into a gully of muck and never get out. So that kind of sense of kind of self-efficacy. No, like more like ability to kind of manage yourself.
Yeah.
And feeling this. So and then this is, of course, severe. This is, so if you're not having all those things, maybe it's but maybe there's another approach that you can take that might be, might not be this heavy therapy. Maybe it's something else. Because we've all had, the world is traumatic, so we're all going to have some element of it in our life.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, the dangers that these kind of labels become a fad, in a sense, that everybody wants to jump on board and say, well, I'm traumatized as well.
Or I treat trauma.
Because it's popular and because it's fashionable and because it's kind of the catchphrase of the day. Labels can be very powerful. We know from actual research that when a person is given a label, they kind of become that, because that's the way the mind works. It works on this identity, and when they identify as the victim or somebody who's been damaged by life, then they tend to experience that. It's and for the long term, they would have a more difficult path than if they found other ways to cope with their experiences.
That's a great segue. This segue is to the Eastern perspective, the Eastern spirituality, from the Upanishads. The teachings say that the true self can never be harmed, can never be damaged, can never be hurt. And when we think about a trauma that happens in someone's life, or any kind of event that happens, it's happening on the ego level. And so we have to kind of look at it if we can look at it from a bigger perspective, from a spiritual perspective. Yes, maybe on a deep ego level, there's a lot going on there. But imagine where do you get that resilience from if you feel like you're just the ego and you're dealing with this event and it defines you and it limits you?
Yeah. And I mean, that was one of the questions we had to deal with in developing our coaching program, is how are we going to deal with this question of trauma? But in looking at the Upanishads, at this wisdom tradition, it essentially says the aim is not just to kind of heal ourselves from the traumatic experiences of life. The aim is to realize that you are this higher self. And the higher self that they describe is pure awareness, meaning it cannot be damaged by experience. It is the observer of that experience, but it cannot be touched or injured in any way by any kind of experience. But of course, they explain that it is a process of realizing that. And so our approach was, if that is the truth, and we can proceed from there, right? That no one is damaged. Yes, they've had experiences that let's say, feel injurious to the ego mind, we can still proceed with the basic truth that their true self is unharmed by any past experiences. And we can help them through their realization, reach that realization themselves, right? That they are the self, they are the true self, and cannot be damaged. And it is a process, of course. That's where Jungian psychology comes in. It gives us an individual psychology of dealing with these past experiences, of understanding them and assimilating them instead of pushing them away or neglecting them, where they actually become instructional. Whatever we experience, even the hard, difficult parts of our lives, now they become ways for us to learn about the nature of our mind.
And from my perspective, I always see that whatever happened to you, the ego wants to protect you. So it comes up with a defense around that. So whatever happened, what's the leftover is really your ego's defensive reaction to that. And so it's not actually the event that you're coping with anymore. It's the leftover of the conditioning that the ego created actually to protect you. So it's a sign that you have a healthy mind because you had a mechanism to maybe you're stressed out all the time, but that's what the ego decided would be better than you just being like, oh, whatever, So it's just kind of like overly trying to protect you. And so if we can kind of have that approach of this defense is there, but it was there for a good reason. It was there, like you were already protected. The ego did such a great job because you're alive here. You're surviving. It found a way. Even most of the time, the ego makes a very fast decision, of what to do in moments, especially when something's like a surprise. So it may kind of gotten a little out of alignment a little bit, but it doesn't mean that it's because that event broke you. It means the ego protected you, and so it's a healthy mind. And also this idea that if you just treat the ego, it'll always feel like it'll never be fixed. It'll always be something else. It's almost like we need that understanding of the true self to really, whether we're working in a therapy environment and we're working with severe trauma or in a coaching environment, we're really seeing ourselves from a deeper place. The only, I think, caveat I have to say, and I'm sure you would agree, is that we're not saying that, oh, I'm spiritual, I wasn't harmed, and you push it away and you don't. No. It's not spiritual bypassing. That I want to make that clear. We're not talking about saying, oh, nothing happened to you. We know things happen to people.
Absolutely. And no, the process is very much about working with our past experiences. What have we gone through? What can we learn from them? And even the difficult stuff, we know, or perhaps we could say that especially the difficult things teach us a lot about our own nature. They inform us. And so those experiences become fuel for our growth.
Our self-realization. So whatever happened to you doesn't define you. Jung says that I'm not what happened to me. I choose who I want to become, and that's for everybody. That's not just reserved for functioning people. That's for everyone can choose to transform and transcend those experiences. That life sentence, that label of have this label now that I had trauma. It doesn't have to define you for the rest of your life. And but we do want to. It's like a dance, right? You don't want to just push it away, and you don't want to dive into it. It's like, where can we find that balance where a person can feel empowered even if they went through a really tough experience, and still be able to have that resilience and empowerment to create a life that most people wouldn't be able to do if they just kind of stuck with that label.
Yeah, it's certainly one of the biggest challenges for us because we're approaching the mind from a different paradigm than the medical model, than the materialistic philosophy of science. We acknowledge science and the valuable information that it provides about the brain and the body, But we know that's not the end of the story. From these wisdom traditions, we know there's a lot more to the human being than meets the eye. And when we approach the mind from that perspective, it's a very different place that it takes you to. Because we know consciousness operates on the principle of expectation. So if you expect only to be healed, only to go back to normalcy, that's what you're going to experience, because you've kind of set it up that way, that in your mind you believe that that's what's possible.
Do you think that sometimes people that have gone through like an uncaring, like neglect in childhood, and then they finally get someone who, like a coach or a healer or a therapist, that gives them that love and attention, it's almost like, well, if I stay in this pattern, I could continue to get that care? Does that happen?
Yes.
Like they get kind of like, I finally got that care. I don't want to let go of my problems, because then I won't have the care anymore. And this is the first time someone ever cared for me. We can get like addicted to it in a way.
Absolutely. Right? I mean, we've been talking about narrative also, how we tend to work in this narrative way, that we have a story about our life. And when we identify with that story and we think that's who I am, that becomes our reality. Right? In essence, we're shaping and creating our reality through our narrative. And so when trauma becomes part of the narrative, part of the self-identity, it's a very powerful thing, because then it's hard to let go of it, because it would be saying, I'm going to let go of my whole self-concept. And
because it's almost like you're letting go of yourself in a way. It's like I don't want to let go of that part of myself.
That's right. It has become part of the way the individual identifies as an individual, as a person, what Jung would call the persona. But Jung's model gives us an individual way of working with the mind, because he does say that this personality is a type of mask. And when you start to understand that, then it makes sense that, the things that happen to the persona, they're difficult and traumatic sometimes, but they're not really happening to the true self. They're happening to this external self-concept that we're creating.
Which isn't solid, which a lot of people, I mean, I didn't realize this until I studied Jung, is that the self-concept is not really solid and can change.
That's
and so
right.
you, as self-concept, to be, I'm the person who suffered this thing, and you can carry that around for the rest of your life, and that's who you'll be, and then you can't be anything else.
Yeah, it seems that the persona was designed as a temporary focal point for the individual to proceed into life. But at midpoint, Jung says, you have to undergo a transformation, a kind of letting go of that persona and finding your true self. And that's what he called individuation. So our coaching model is based on that process of individuation, so that people that are ready to let go of their stories, of the old persona, of the mask, they can undergo this transformation in a non-clinical way. In other words, we don't have to wait until the person experiences some kind of breakdown or some kind of traumatic experience. They can do it in a more gradual, supportive way through coaching.
So instead of defining yourself about what happened to you, you start to create a new definition of who you are, who you're becoming, versus this is what happened to me and this is who I am versus who I'm becoming.
Yes and no, because let's say that the self is already fully formed.
Okay. Well, so becoming aware of consciousness.
Yeah. We're just having a discussion. It's more like it's a revelation of the true self.
Yeah.
So it's already there, but it's been covered over by the mask. Just like an individual that's wearing a mask, their face is already there, but it's covered over.
Another thing I see too is, especially with parent and the parents are usually take the brunt of this in these kind of methodologies of trying to heal the trauma. It's yes, the parent is maybe have inflicted harm on the child or appeared to. But there's a lot of pressure on a parent to be perfect.
Oh, yeah.
And we're not excusing the parents that were neglectful or that were, maybe did things that were not nice. But if we hang on to that person has power over us for the rest of our life, that we're really giving away our power to that person. It's not even about forgiveness. It's about willing to say, I'm going to take responsibility for my life now. What happened to me wasn't my responsibility in a way because I'm a child or, I wasn't aware and I'm unconscious. But as we become conscious, we can be more responsible for our life and who we choose to be around and the direction of our life.
Yeah, it's interesting that, you were talking about how the mind reacts by defending itself in a way to protect us. And one of the marks of people that have undergone childhood trauma is that sense of blaming, that they blame others, they blame the world, and that becomes kind of a part of their self-identity.
Is it a way for them to get strength?
Well, it would be a defense mechanism, right?
Yeah.
It's a way of protecting themselves, of saying, if I can't trust the world, I have to stay away from them. I have to protect myself. And rightly so, if they were still in that original environment where they experienced that. But now they're not, and they're still reacting in that same way.
They're living in the past.
That's it. They're holding on to their past experiences and bringing it into the present.
So holding on to the blame is also holding on to the trauma.
Yes.
And not really feeling powerful. I mean, if you think about it, it's not empowering. It's not to say that they can get away. Like, I think people think if I don't hang on to it, they're going to they got away with it. And if I've seen too, working with people, is that if I became successful, if I had a healthy relationship finally, if I, lost weight because, even though I went through all that, then it would be like that didn't happen, almost like this kind of a sabotaging of stepping out because we feel like it's going to erase all those things and the blame, it's really hard, I think, for a person to come to terms of why did this bad thing happen to me?
Yeah, it is. It is difficult, right? Because if you think about it, that's what gives them that sense of safety is that they have these defense mechanisms.
And the story too, right?
Yes, and the story. And so to let go of that feels very vulnerable to them. It feels like I'm going to be in danger as I was in my previous environment or in my early environment. But through the process of individuation, a person can learn that thoughts cannot really harm you. Memories cannot harm you. They're important and they're very powerful if we give them power. But as we proceed to make them conscious, as to bring them into real awareness, they lose their power over us.
What about emotions? Can they harm someone?
Again, if we give them the power to harm us, they can.
But we can, if you use pure awareness and you're watching your body or your identity, go through but you're not kind of diving into the wrestling with it. You're kind of being more the witness. You can basically ride the wave of it versus be in the wave of it.
Yeah, a lot of it boils down to a misunderstanding. For example, depression. We know depression is difficult, can destroy a person. It can drive a person to destroy themselves, essentially, to commit suicide. But if we understand it as the mind's signal to look inward, to take some time to self-examine, and then there's somebody to help the person do that, then it becomes a path inward.
It's an opportunity.
An opportunity for individuation, for really getting in touch with the inner self. But often because it's labeled as a disorder, again, a medicalized problem, then the opportunity is lost. Because now all the individual can do when they buy into that medicalization is treat it with drugs or therapy, and then the aim is just to get back to normal functioning instead of to say, what can I learn from this experience of depression?
Now, we do want to get to normal function. We don't want to. You can't go to potential without getting to normal functioning. So you have to pass through that threshold. but it doesn't. You don't have to stay in that dysfunction, and it's almost like you're drowning under the water, and you're never coming up for air. It's like it could. I know people have been dealing with these things for years or decades, and so our inspiration today is, make sure you get the right assessment if you're in that severe category. Educate yourself on your own path, psychology, understanding where you're at, and then find the right appropriate approach for you depending on your specific needs, and really look for professionals, because if you try to self-treat, or you try to feel like, I feel like a lot of people just want that quick fix. Like, I'm just going to go to this workshop and it's going to clear all my traumas. Is that healthy? Almost like you miss out on all the development and the discovery, that there's like a lot of gold in there that you can discover, and you're trying to like push it out of the way so you can have a life. It's the way. Like, it's not you go on your way after you move this stuff out. It's like the way. It's the path to understand yourself.
Yeah, and as far as how we, let's say, how we deal with the question of trauma in our coaching, we let the individual choose, but of course we inform them on what is that situation and what does it mean to have a difficult experience, and kind of ask them, where are they at? Have they done previous work to deal with that? Do they feel they're ready to proceed forward instead of needing to go backward and deal with those things? And if they say, yeah, I'm ready to proceed forward, then our coaching model is appropriate for them. And if they're not, we can refer them to somebody who can help them with their trauma. And as far as our training with our coaches, we try to instill that idea that the individual cannot be broken.
On the deepest, truest self.
Yeah, at the self level. They can certainly have difficult experiences that need special care and special attention, but that the approach is always, brokenness is an impossibility. Right? It's a state of mind that can occur at the ego level, but it's not a reality.
From a self perspective, the trauma is more of a superficial wound than a life damaging, life ending, lifelong struggle. But from an ego perspective, it's so big. So it's like shifting your perspective about what is really happening. Why do I have these defenses? And how can I be empowered to live the life I want and not let anything, whatever happened to me, doesn't have to define me and doesn't have to limit me. So what a great topic today. So next week, we are going to talk about, I can't remember now. Do you remember what next week is?
I don't.
You'll have to wait to see what happens.
It's a mystery.
Yes. We are doing a series on personalities, and we're excited to bring a new way to look at personal development in a more empowering way, feeling not broken, and also understanding psychology in a deeper way and understanding what you need so you can get the life you want and create happiness and joy in your life.
Yeah, thanks for watching.
Yes. Take care and see you next week.